In the bustling city of Luoyang during the Tang Dynasty, Mei Lin knelt on the cold stone floor of her father's study, her silk robes pooling around her like spilled wine. The merchant Zhang Wei paced before her, his face carved with the harsh lines of financial ruin. Outside, autumn winds rattled the paper screens, carrying the scent of burning incense from nearby temples. "Daughter, you must understand," Zhang Wei's voice cracked like dried leather. "The drought destroyed our trade routes. The bandits took what little remained. Without this arrangement, our entire family faces starvation." His weathered hands clutched a small pouch of silver coins, the metal clinking softly with each nervous movement. Mei Lin raised her eyes, dark as midnight pools, meeting her father's tormented gaze. At 19, she possessed a beauty that had drawn suitors from across the province. Delicate features framed by lustrous black hair, skin like polished jade, and a grace that spoke of noble breeding despite their merchant-class origins. "I know, father," she whispered, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I have always known this day might come." The words tasted bitter as medicinal herbs, but she spoke them with the dignity her mother had taught her before fever claimed her life 3 winters past. The Golden Lotus Pavilion rose from Luoyang's entertainment district like a jeweled lotus from murky waters. Red lacquered pillars supported curved roofs adorned with golden dragons, their eyes seeming to follow visitors with ancient wisdom. Paper lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the courtyard where koi swam in contemplative circles. Madame Wu, the pavilion's proprietor, examined Mei Lin with the calculating eye of someone who had traded in human beauty for 30 years. Her own face, once lovely, now bore the mask of rouge and powder that couldn't quite hide the hardness beneath. Jade bracelets clinked as she lifted Mei Lin's chin, studying her profile like a jeweler appraising precious stones. "Exquisite bone structure," Wu murmured to Zhang Wei, who stood nearby wringing his hands. "Virgin, you claim? Good. The scholars and officials prefer unspoiled merchandise." She walked around Mei Lin slowly, her silk slippers whispering against wooden floors. "She'll fetch top price within the month." The silver coins changed hands with ceremonial gravity. 40 pieces, enough to save the Zhang family from debtor's prison, but nowhere near enough to preserve Mei Lin's dignity. As her father's footsteps faded into the night, Mei Lin felt her old life dissolve like sugar in rain. Dawn in the Golden Lotus brought harsh realities wrapped in silk and perfume. Mei Lin shared cramped quarters with 12 other girls, each bearing the weight of similar stories. Daughters sold to settle debts, wives abandoned by gambling husbands, village maidens kidnapped by slave traders who haunted the mountain passes. "Keep your head down and speak only when spoken to," advised Xiaoyu, a girl no older than 16, whose bright eyes had already dulled with resignation. "Learn the arts of pleasing men, poetry, music, the tea ceremony. Those who excel in refinement last longer than those who rely solely on beauty." Mei Lin's days blurred into rigid routine, morning exercises to maintain graceful posture, afternoon lessons in classical literature and musical instruments, evening preparation for the pavilion's nightly entertainment. She learned to paint her face into porcelain perfection, to move with liquid grace that suggested availability without desperation, to smile while her heart cracked like ice in spring. The other girls watched her with mixed emotions, envy for her obvious quality that would command high prices, sympathy for the innocence she was rapidly losing, and grudging respect for the dignity she maintained despite circumstances that had broken stronger spirits. Governor Li Zhao arrived on an autumn evening when crimson leaves scattered across the pavilion's courtyard like drops of blood. His retinue filled the main hall, lesser officials seeking favor, merchants hoping for trading privileges, and guards whose presence reminded everyone of the governor's absolute authority within Luoyang's walls. Madame Wu presented Mei Lin like a treasured artwork, speaking of her literary accomplishments, musical skills, and pristine virtue with the enthusiasm of someone presenting tribute to an emperor. Li Jiao studied her through calculating eyes that had judged thousands of lives and found most wanting. "Recite something," he commanded, settling back into silk cushions while servants poured wine from ceramic bottles shaped like phoenixes. The room fell silent, except for the soft whisper of bamboo wind chimes outside. Mei Lin chose verses from Li Bai's Quiet Night Thought, her voice carrying the poet's melancholy across hushed air. "Before my bed, the bright moonlight gleams. I think it's frost upon the ground. I lift my head to watch the bright moon, lower it to think of my hometown." Her recitation transformed the brothel's main hall into something approaching sacred space where beauty and sorrow intertwined like lovers' hands. Li Jiao nodded approvingly, already calculating how owning such refinement would enhance his reputation among the capital's cultured elite. 3 days of negotiation followed Governor Li's visit. Mei Lin watched from her window as messengers carried offers back and forth across the city, like merchants haggling over precious silk. The other girls whispered rumors. Li Jiao had offered enough silver to buy a small estate. Madame Wu was demanding additional considerations, including political protection for her establishment. "You should feel honored," Xiao Yu told her one evening as they prepared for sleep. "Most of us will service dozens of men before we're worn out and discarded. You'll live in luxury as one man's treasured possession." But her words carried no conviction, only the hollow comfort of someone convincing herself that some fates were worse than others. Mei Lin understood the mathematics of her situation. As Li Jiao's exclusive concubine, she would have fine clothes, educated servants, perhaps even children who might claim some form of legitimacy. Yet the golden cage would remain a cage, and the man who owned her was known throughout the province for his cruelty to those who displeased him. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of her childhood home, where her mother's garden bloomed with peonies and jasmine, where her father had once looked at her with pride instead of desperate calculation, where freedom had seemed as natural as breathing. The Shaolin monastery of Whitehorse Temple had stood for 6 centuries on the hills overlooking Luoyang, its pagodas piercing morning mist like prayers made manifest in stone and wood. Brother Chen Wu descended into the city at dawn, his saffron robes marking him as one sworn to poverty, compassion, and the Buddha's path toward enlightenment. His mission was simple: purchase rice and vegetables for the monastery's kitchen, perhaps acquire new brushes for copying sacred texts. But the Dharma taught that all encounters held meaning for those with eyes to see, and Chen Wu noticed everything. The flower seller whose smile never reached her worried eyes, the beggar whose wounds spoke of recent violence, the young woman visible through the Golden Lotus Pavilion's window, who radiated sadness like incense smoke. Chen Wu had renounced his birth name and aristocratic heritage 15 years earlier, seeking truth beyond material attachment. Yet something about the girl's posture, the way she held her head with dignity despite obvious captivity, stirred memories of his sister, lost to fever when both were children. He paused in the street, observing the pavilion's morning routine. This was not his concern, he reminded himself. A monk's duty was to his brothers, his studies, his progress toward liberation from worldly suffering. Yet the Buddha's first teaching was about the reality of suffering, and suffering sat at that window wearing silk robes and a face like carved jade. That evening, Chen Wu knelt before Master Hui Neng in the monastery's meditation hall, where golden Buddha statues seemed to listen with infinite patience. The old monk's face, weathered by decades of contemplation, showed neither surprise nor judgment as Chen Wu spoke of what he had witnessed in the city. "Master, I cannot shake the image of that girl from my mind. Is this attachment that I should overcome, or compassion calling me to action?" Chen Wu's voice carried the confusion of someone whose spiritual training conflicted with human emotion. Hui Neng was silent for long minutes, watching incense smoke spiral toward the painted ceiling where celestial beings danced among clouds. Finally, he spoke. "The Buddha taught that all beings desire freedom from suffering. Sometimes that freedom comes through acceptance, sometimes through action, sometimes through the generosity of others." He gestured toward a wooden chest beside the altar, its brass fittings gleaming in candlelight. "This contains donations from pilgrims, silver coins meant to support our work. What is our work, Chen Wu? Only the copying of texts and the growing of vegetables? Or might it sometimes include the liberation of those who cannot free themselves?" Chen Wu understood. The monastery had funds enough, accumulated over years of careful stewardship, and Master Hui Neng, despite his humble manner, had been born to wealth and retained connections throughout the imperial bureaucracy. If anyone could navigate the complex negotiations required to purchase a concubine's freedom, it would be the master of White Horse Temple. Dawn brought mist that clung to Luoyang's streets like ghostly silk, and with it came Abbot Hui Neng himself, accompanied by 2 younger monks and a small chest of monastery funds. His presence in the entertainment district caused whispers among early merchants. What business could the revered spiritual leader possibly have in such worldly quarters? Madame Wu received them in her private chambers, a room that balanced luxury with respectability through careful placement of classical paintings and scholarly calligraphy. She had dealt with unusual clients before, officials seeking to impress superiors with their refinement, merchants wanting to display newfound wealth, even other religious figures whose vows apparently contained flexible interpretations. "Honored Abbot," she began, offering tea in cups worth more than most families' yearly income, "how may this humble establishment serve the monastery's needs?" Hui Neng's response carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "We wish to purchase the girl called Mei Lin, not for personal use, you understand, but to offer her freedom as an act of compassion in Buddha's name." The proposition was unprecedented. Madame Wu had sold girls to wealthy households, to traveling merchants, even to other brothels in distant cities. But selling one to be freed, the concept challenged everything she understood about human nature and commercial reality. What followed was perhaps the most unusual business negotiation in Luoyang's history. Madame Wu, despite her profession, was no fool. She had built the Golden Lotus from nothing through shrewd judgment and careful cultivation of powerful connections. The monastery's offer, while generous, represented lost future earnings and potential complications with Governor Li Jiao, who still expected to claim his purchased concubine. "You understand," Wu explained with barely concealed anxiety, "that Governor Li has already made arrangements. To disappoint such a man invites consequences that extend far beyond mere financial loss." Abbot Hui Neng smiled with the serenity of someone who had faced both imperial favor and imperial wrath during his long career. "Governor Li is a practical man. Present him with a suitable alternative, perhaps that lovely girl Xiao Yu, along with sufficient compensation for his inconvenience, and he will adapt. Powerful men appreciate those who solve problems rather than create them." The negotiation consumed 3 days, involving careful choreography of offers, counter-offers, and face-saving measures for all parties. The monastery would pay double Mei Lin's agreed price, half to Madame Wu, half to Governor Li, as compensation for his disappointment. Xiao Yi would be prepared as a substitute offering, with additional training in the refined arts that attracted the governor's interest. On the fourth day, as autumn sunlight slanted through the pavilion's courtyard, Mei Lin was summoned to Madame Wu's chambers. She entered expecting another client evaluation, perhaps final preparations for transfer to Governor Li's household. Instead, she found the Buddhist abbot seated beside Wu's desk, his calm presence somehow making the ornate room feel like a temple sanctuary. "Child," Madame Wu began, her voice unusually gentle, "circumstances have changed. This holy man has purchased your freedom as an act of religious merit. You are no longer bound to this house or to any man's service." The words seemed to echo from across vast distances. Mei Lin stared at the abbot, searching his weathered features for signs of deception or hidden purpose. In her experience, men who claimed altruistic motives usually harbored darker intentions, yet his eyes held only compassion and a deep weariness that spoke of genuine spiritual struggle. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this for someone you've never met?" Abbot Huineng rose, his movements careful with age but dignified. "The Buddha taught that all beings are connected by invisible threads of karma and compassion. Perhaps your thread led to our monastery for reasons we may never fully comprehend. What matters is that you are free to choose your own path forward." Freedom, Mei Lin discovered, was more complex than simply walking through an unlocked door. The monastery offered sanctuary, but a Buddhist temple was no place for a young woman to reside permanently. The abbot had arranged temporary lodging with a respectable widow who took in boarders, along with sufficient funds to support modest independence for several months. Yet after years of having every decision made by others, the responsibility of choice felt overwhelming. Mei Lin sat in her simple room at Widow Chen's house, staring at her reflection in a bronze mirror. The face that looked back was the same that had enchanted clients at the Golden Lotus: delicate features, lustrous hair, skin like polished jade. But the eyes had changed, holding depths that spoke of experiences no young woman should carry. Brother Chen Wu visited daily, bringing small gifts from the monastery: fresh vegetables, writing brushes, copied sutras that spoke of liberation from worldly suffering. His presence was comforting without being possessive, compassionate without expectation. In their conversations, Mei Lin began to understand that freedom was not merely the absence of chains, but the presence of genuine choice. "What will you do now?" he asked one evening as they walked through Widow Chen's garden, where late chrysanthemums bloomed despite approaching winter. "I don't know," Mei Lin admitted. "I was trained to please others, to be ornamental. I'm not sure what purpose I might serve in the world beyond that." Widow Chen, despite her modest circumstances, possessed something Mei Lin had never encountered: a complete library inherited from her deceased husband, a minor official who had collected books with the passion other men reserved for wine or gambling. Classical texts, poetry collections, historical chronicles, even treatises on governance and philosophy lined wooden shelves from floor to ceiling. "Can you read?" Chen asked one morning, finding Mei Lin studying a volume of Tang poetry with obvious hunger. "I was taught enough to entertain clients with literary conversation," Mei Lin replied. "But I always wanted to truly understand, not merely perform understanding." What followed was an informal education that transformed winter months into intellectual spring. Widow Chen, grateful for companionship in her isolated old age, shared knowledge accumulated over decades of quiet study. Mei Lin devoured texts like someone ending a lifelong fast, discovering worlds of thought and feeling that her previous existence had never allowed. Brother Chen Wu contributed Buddhist scriptures and philosophical commentaries, engaging Mei Lin in discussions that would have scandalized her former captors. The Golden Lotus had trained her mind for shallow entertainment. Now she exercised it for profound understanding. Poetry revealed layers of meaning beyond pretty phrases. History showed patterns of human behavior that transcended individual experience. philosophy offered frameworks for understanding suffering and liberation. Spring brought more than warming weather. It brought opportunity in the form of Master Liu, an elderly scholar whose failing eyesight threatened to end his career as a private tutor for wealthy families. Widow Chen suggested Mei Lin as a reading companion, someone who could assist with correspondence and help prepare lessons for his students. Master Liu was skeptical at first. A former courtesan as academic assistant? The notion challenged conventional wisdom about appropriate female roles. But Mei Lin's first reading of a complex historical text, delivered with perfect pronunciation and evident comprehension, convinced him that talent transcended social origins. Within weeks, she had become indispensable. Her beautiful voice brought ancient poetry to life. Her careful brush strokes produced clean copies of important documents. Her intelligent questions revealed insights that enriched Liu's own understanding. When wealthy families requested female tutors for their daughters, women who could provide both academic instruction and lessons in proper deportment, Mei Lin's combination of scholarly knowledge and refined manner made her the obvious choice. The irony was not lost on her. Skills developed to serve men's pleasure had been transformed into tools for other women's liberation. She taught merchant daughters to read classical literature, showed officials' wives how to compose poetry that revealed their inner thoughts, guided young mothers in understanding history's lessons about governance and social responsibility. 1 year after her liberation, Mei Lin stood before the White Horse Temple's main hall, preparing to fulfill a vow she had made during her darkest hours at the Golden Lotus. In her hands, she carried 2 gifts, a copy of the Lotus Sutra that she had transcribed herself in gratitude for the monastery's intervention, and a small pouch containing silver coins, not the 40 pieces that had purchased her freedom, but savings from her teaching income that would help free another girl from similar bondage. Abbot Huineng received both offerings with the same serene acceptance he had shown when authorizing her purchase. Around them, afternoon light filtered through paper screens, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny prayers in the sacred air. "Master," Mei Lin said, bowing deeply, "I understand now that freedom is not something that can be given or taken, only recognized. You helped me see what was always true, that my worth was never determined by others' desires, or my father's desperation, or my former captivity. It existed independently, waiting for me to claim it." The old monk smiled, his weathered features creasing with genuine joy. The Buddha taught that all beings possess inherent dignity, regardless of circumstances. Sometimes we need others to remind us of truths we have temporarily forgotten. As Mei Lin walked down the mountain path toward Luoyang, where her students waited and her new life continued to unfold, she carried with her the knowledge that liberation was both gift and responsibility. The silver coins that had once purchased her body had been transformed through compassion into something far more precious, proof that one person's freedom could become the seed of another's, creating ripples of liberation that might continue long after her own story had ended. Behind her, temple bells rang in the evening air, their bronze voices carrying across the valley like promises that even the darkest captivity was temporary, and that compassion, once awakened, could transform the world one silver coin at a time.